This video is all about how we can up our blueberry rhubarb jam. It comes out pretty awesome, so stay tuned if you want to see how we make it. Here's the recipe card for the blueberry rhubarb jam that we're going to be making today.
To make our rhubarb blueberry jam, well, we have our blueberries and rhubarb that we harvested a while ago. And I didn't have time to can them right then, so I just threw them in the freezer, and now they are thawing out and they are ready to go. And we have our jars getting sterilized in the oven, and then we have a big pot we're going to put everything in to make our jam. And I like this recipe because you can use this recipe with any berries or fruit that you have. In my opinion, that's how I like to use it, but I really like the combination of the blueberries and the rhubarb because it seems to set up really well, and there's no pectin in this recipe, which is another thing I really like. All right, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to process all of the rhubarb pieces in a food processor because that way they will get broken down a little bit more. Last time I did this recipe, they were kind of stringy in there and I didn't like the look of that. So I'm going to hopefully avoid that by running them through the food processor. And as I put them into the food processor, I'm going to count how many cups I have. Right now I have 4 gallons, but it might end up being less when I measure it out with cups, and that will tell me how much I need for the other ingredients to make this batch of jam. A couple of the blueberries are also going to be blended up, but that's okay. The rest will not be. So 1, 6. I'm going to scrape down the sides.
The food processor was not doing the trick, so I decided to switch over to the blender to really get this pureed.
All right, I'm going to put it on liquefy and blend it up. The consistency is better, but you can still see the little stringy portions of the rhubarb. But I guess we'll just have to be okay with it. Okay, so I'm counting the cups as they go in to see how much fruit I have. I'm already on 11, so this is 12. Okay, I have my berry jam spatula, it's a really long spatula, in hand. We're going to watch this and move it around a lot, not let it burn. And then I will add the remaining ingredients. Once I get the remaining ingredients in, I will let it come to a point of boiling, and it'll kind of foam up a little bit. And after it gets to that point for a little while, then we will shut it off and I will jar it up. Our jars are already getting sterilized. In the meantime, I'll be working on sterilizing the rings and the lids. Now, this would be a lot easier if these berries weren't partially frozen right now. So I'm going to be standing here for a while, really mixing this around and making sure it doesn't burn at the bottom. This stuff is pretty susceptible to burning, especially once you put the additional sugars in there and other seasonings. All right, so we'll get it cooked down and then I'll be back with you. As you can see, things are starting to get a little bit more jammy in there. I'm making sure to kind of scrape the bottom to make sure that this doesn't burn. I feel some pieces down there that are getting close, so this is something we really have to watch right now as this thaws out and just gets warm. I did turn the heat down a little bit too. It's smelling good though. It has been about 15 minutes and the blueberry rhubarb jam is looking a lot better. I'm constantly still mixing though, but it's getting closer, getting more warmed up. Now, of course, if you were using fresh fruit, you wouldn't have this long of a wait time as what we've had, but it is nice to be able to pick or harvest fruit and then throw it in the freezer for a rainy day when you have time to do it. Our jam is looking like it's just about ready for us to add our extra ingredients. So we're going to start adding those in. And then after that point, it's really important we don't walk away from this jam. So we ended up with about 42 cups of fruit in here. So we are going to triple the recipe that's provided. That means I need 12 cups of sugar in here. I like to make sure I stir them up as I go so it's not a big cold portion going in, and it makes it a lot easier to stir. So that was 4 right there. Let's get 8 more in here. All right, there's 12 cups of sugar. Let's get all that sugar mixed in. Oh, and that is That first round is really helping everything start to boil a lot more. So this recipe does call for salt and pepper, and I promise you, put them in. I know it seems kind of weird, but it does something to the flavors to make it really yummy. So we are going to multiply what we need for the recipe, which is 3/4 teaspoons of salt first. There's our salt, and we need 3 teaspoons of pepper since we're tripling this recipe. 1, 2, 3. Now it's time for almond and vanilla extract. We're going to do vanilla extract first, and I'm just going to put 1/2 teaspoon times 3, so 1.5 teaspoons. Same goes for our almond extract. Alright, we're going to get that all mixed together. This jam is getting more jammy as every moment goes on. We need 1/4 cup of lemon juice times 3, so 3/4 cup of lemon juice. There we go. Our lemon juice is in. Our jam is boiling vigorously, I would say. I've done the thermometer a couple of times, and we're right about that 220 point, which is supposed to be the jam set point. So I'm going to keep stirring this, and I might turn it down a little bit in just a minute, especially if it really starts to splatter out. Our rings are already all sterilized, and I will do the lids in just a minute. I'm going to leave this on the stove and let it cook for a while longer, and then soon we will put this on a lower heat, and I will let it just kind of sit and get my jars all the way ready, and then we'll jar it up and get this water bathed. You see how it kind of foams up? That's why we want to make sure not to use too small of a pot, which we're right on the edge here with this pot size and the amount that I put in there. One way to see if this has jammed up enough is to put a little bit on a plate. I'm going to pop this in the freezer. In a couple minutes we'll take it out and we'll do the streak test where you run your finger through it and turn it on its side and see if it runs all over or if it holds up and it's firm. And I only put that in the freezer for about a minute just to cool it down quickly so I don't have to wait too long. So we just pulled this out. We're going to run our finger through it to see, oh, it still could use a little bit more time to set up. Why don't you try it? You like it? Does it need anything?
Nope.
I really want to make sure this sets up well, so I put the lid on, and I'm going to sit here and stir periodically, but I want it to get hot enough to jam. Let's try a little bit more on a plate back in the freezer. See if it's set up. It's been a couple more minutes. Okay, time to try our jam again to see if it's holding up any better. Yeah, I'd say that's holding up. So we're going to turn the heat off and let this cool down a little bit before you jar it up. Our jam is ready to get jarred up. Let's get them in these jars. We did also pull these jars out a little bit ahead of time to let them kind of reach the same temperature as our jam, and we let our jam cool off a little bit. We want everything to be about the same as far as warmth, so we can avoid cracking or breaking any of these jars. I do also have our water bath canner all set up, and I actually use a pressure cooker, but I don't put the lid on. It's just because it's what we have in our kitchen right now. And I fill it up like you would a water bath. We're going to get these jarred up, and I'm leaving about 1 inch of headspace. Time to wipe all of the rims. I just like using a damp napkin and getting them all cleaned up. We don't want any jam in between our seal and the jar. We want to have a good seal. That is pretty important. Of course, this is a canning recipe, and you also want to make sure that you do your research and you know how to safely go about canning. I guess that's kind of a little disclaimer. Make sure you research it and make sure you know how to use your equipment and how to do this in a safe way. But this is just the method of how we get this done. Now this recipe calls for 10 minutes of a boiling water bath We have about an inch of water over our jars, so that looks about good. We are at a higher altitude, so we're going to do a 20-minute water bath. You want to make sure you check your altitude where you live to make sure you water bath for the correct amount of time. I'm just going to set this lid on here, and this is going to get up to a boil. Once it gets up to a boil, I will start the timer. The water bath is now going, so it's time to set the timer, and we are going to water bath these for 20 minutes because we are at 4,000 feet. But if you're at sea level, it calls for a 10-minute water bath. Make sure you just check your altitude and adjust accordingly. Our timer just went off. We're going to get these jars out. Turn the stove off. Take our lid off. A little hot. And get our jars out. We are doing 2 rounds for what we have ready today. But otherwise, we're going to let these sit here and cool off. And tomorrow what I will do is I will take these rings off and get them washed down a little bit more. Sometimes they release some of the jam and it gets sticky on the outside. So I wash the jars actually once the rings are off. Once you can take the rings off, don't take the rings off right now. And then I write what they are on the lids and get them in our canning room. And since this jar wasn't quite full, I didn't water bath it, and we're going to try some of it. So I have a piece of toast over here, and we make our bread at home, so it looks a little different than what you would get from a store. It looks pretty good consistency. This was in the fridge, but it is still a little bit warm. But I want to see how it tastes just by itself on a piece of bread. That looks pretty good. All right. Let's see how this tastes. That is good. It's like candy. So sweet and so good. Great on peanut butter and jelly, in oatmeal, however you want to use it. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching this video on how we make our blueberry rhubarb jam and how we can it up with a water bath method.